we've done some programs about that. You know, that thing about energy and so forth with people, talking about. What are we talking about? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Good evening and welcome to Conversations. This evening, Conversations is in the home of Ed Saunders. And to those of you who are in any kind of way regular viewers of Conversations in its mode of consideration of things like art and consciousness and ultimate responsibility for what might be considered the poetic vision in this part of universe, you'll have no need to be introduced to Mr. Saunders. Ed Saunders, welcome very, very much to Conversations, and thank you very, very much for inviting us into your home here in Woodstock, New York. The thing that I immediately asked of the program, structured around, was the phenomena of Charles Manson, which you took upon yourself a tremendous interest in a few years ago. I wonder why was it that you felt that the activities of Charlie Manson and what he, what was manifest around him, was worthy of so much of your attention, and what prompted you to put so much attention in the study of the Charles Manson that came out in the book, The Family?
Well, any such project begins with a hope that the project will not be so exhaustive and take such a long length of time. However, I became interested in the case and started clipping newspapers. And as soon as the case broke, I'd never heard of Manson. I never knew anything about the group until they were arrested in October of 1969. The press coverage indicating that this was a roving band of dune buggy driving semi-nude communards roaming Death Valley who were caught on a stolen car charge after an extensive multi-day or multi-week chase through the vastnesses of Death Valley National Park.
This was when you first picked up?
That's when I first heard of it.
When would that have been?
Right after, would be in the end of October or early November of 1969, and then, as I said, a month later, they were charged with those murders, and then I began clipping the newspapers and following the case as it appeared, specifically in the New York City newspapers, the Times, the Post, and the News, and then Life magazine hit the stands about 2 weeks later with a Life-type reportage on it. And then one thing led to another, to the point where I had a bulging manila folder of clips, and then I made a list of questions that seemed to me to be unanswered, submitted it to a publisher, got a contract, and then I was off.
Yeah. I see. That's sort of the thing. But I was wondering what it was. There was something particularly fascinating to you. You've had an interest in a great number of things, but there was something particularly fascinating about the phenomena of Manson in terms of that drew you to it. I mean, what was there about him? I mean, he was an amazing character in these particular times.
Well, it was my response, like any other decision to enter a project, was based on my own life at that point. For a number of years, I'd had rock and roll band, which I had disbanded in early '69.
The Fugs.
The Fugs, and I spent the summer of '69 writing a piece of fiction, and then I was done. And I had done an album on my phonographic recording for Warner Brothers, Reprise, in that summer also of '69. And then in the fall of '69, I didn't have anything to do, and I was looking for a challenging project. And something told me in the back of my mind that lurking beneath this case of murder and alleged long-hair hippie dope fiend communards was something lurking there to be uncovered. I didn't realize. I'd never covered a trial. I'd never written any kind of reportage. I'd never tried to interrogate people. I'd never talked to a cop in my life. I mean, I always where I grew up, you tried to the rule was never look at a cop, never get their attention, and always hide your beer can in the car underneath your coat or something and try to drive past them. So, I have a very primitive idea of law enforcement, and I had been in the left and in radical politics for a number of years, and in which the concepts of the police were automatic paranoia jolt would occur.
Yeah, so but you had to have dealings with them now, and dealing with the reportings for the book on Manson. You got in touch with the police and so forth, a whole new realm. Huh?
I met policemen, and I grew to actually a certain degree of friendship with certain police people in California.
Yeah, it was a different kind of.
Kind
of experience.
They're different. Like a homicide, I'm fully in favor of very, very well-supplied homicide departments. I don't think there's any excuse for having a police department, any police at all. It's to solve and prevent murders, which I view as the principal crime in human affairs.
There's a tremendous interest in Charles Manson. Yeah, you think that if we look at the times, what is it now? We're 1975, and you look back 1967, 1968, 69, the Woodstock, the phenomena of countercultural activities that were going on. That in a certain sense, with what you would call the traditional society, the dominant culture, the traditional society, the middle-class suburban society, who was trying to understand what was going on and what was meant by counterculture, that the impetus behind what was the counterculture and desires for change and for bringing new kinds of life-supportive capability to whatever it is was going on in the spaceship was really seriously damaged by somehow being tagged and being represented by somebody like Charlie Manson, that he was an archetypical countercultural figure.
Well, I think
in the minds of the citizenry,
I think
the
that's
general citizenry. Yeah.
I think that's what the right-wing elements would try to do, but I think it's a moniker or an appellation that will not stick and has not stuck, and that the basic achievements of the so-called counterculture or the anti-war movement or the new consciousness or the implications of the Beat generation, whatever you want to call it, will withstand time, and it was some of the most important strands that have led to our consciousness now. So Manson
was an aberration in a sense.
Was I think a victim of certain strains of cruelty that exist in American civilization. And I think he used these techniques of cruelty to inflict, to spread the cruelty onward. But
did you ever meet with him?
Well, I met with him just briefly, because I had problems with that group of people. Once they found out I was really serious in finding out what was going on.
Yeah, I must have.
I won't even go into, but I had a number of problems with that group. He kept looking at me and playing with his throat in the courtroom as if indicating a possible lesion in my own gentle throat. I called him a racist once in the Los Angeles Free Press, and he really got upset.
This is during the course of the trial?
Yeah, I went to cover a lot of the trial. I was actually there every day covering and writing weekly columns for the Los Angeles Free Press.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I wrote 25 or so articles, just hanging out with the Manson family and attending a trial and doing my own research at the same time, trying to dig up the data. And I decided to write a form of journalism, a form of writing in the book, a chronological narrative, which is, I find, really hard to do. That is, I decided to figure out exactly what this group of people did for 3 years. Yeah. And that's what I attempted to do in my book. I didn't decide I'm not going to use the personal pronoun. I wasn't going to describe the investigation. That is, many books, such as investigative books, much of the book is spent describing how the person runs around and interviews people, and you have to search in vain for the real heavy information. So I decided just to forget about myself and to write a narrative, which is what I did. I thought it was going to be quicko, easy to do. I'd go out there and everybody, I'd be a counterculture, alleged leader, unquote, and I'd go out there and suck up the data and talk to a couple of cops, and then bop back up to my pad in New York City, type it up, and that'd be it.
Yeah.
Except I've never seen a case, because see that those murders, the Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger and Jay Sebring and Wojciech Frykowski and Stephen Parent and the LaBiancas and those other and the related murders were uncovered such a huge spectrum of things that people wanted to hide, everything from pornographic movies of Hollywood to drug dealings to people's cultic persuasions as to religion and generally people's bad news they wanted to hide on all fronts from all aspects of California life, and so there are all these desperate people interested in keeping these facts hidden. So sometimes you call somebody up on a phone and just to get one fact out of them would involve, like, you'd ask them a question and like a minute would go by before they would answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so one became like and you realize that after all that you realize why there's no real good investigative reporting or there's very little investigative reporting, because it's a nightmare to get. Sometimes you chase a fact for a year. You know what I mean? And I remember chasing one guy there was this one guy that was supposed to have been at Sharon Tate's house that night and delivered some dope or something, and so I was chasing this guy. I was trying to locate him. I was going through court records. I was looking for this guy, and finally found out where he was and where he lived. I found an address for him, and then they found him in a car trunk in LaGuardia or John F. Kennedy Airport. So I mean, there's a type of blind alley energy you'll expend and find out you can't interrogate some poor human being who was found in a car trunk. See? So I mean, there was a typical thing of typical problems I faced. But I'll tell you, it was interesting. At least I learned how to. I learned one of the things I learned was that the police have got to be converted to the benign civilization.
They have to be converted.
Absolutely, you can't deny the police and law enforcement in trying to transform the civilization. Absolutely cannot.
Is there anyone we should deny, or is there anyone that can be denied in trying to transform the civilization? Not to get off onto another tactic, or, I mean, it would.
I think there are those individuals.
Are there some people who are so bad that they have to be denied, or?
I think there's a lot of people who are so damaged and so warped and violent that they're. I think nothing short of their own aging process and ultimate senility will calm them out. Or
they're beyond being able to be reached in order to be included within the benign society.
Well, we're all trapped in the limitations of time. And
yes,
I suppose you had enough time with an Adolf Hitler. You had like 200 years of yoga meditation, you know what I mean?
Or perhaps just the processes of the evolution of consciousness may arrive at a moment when they could be inclusive of everyone, somehow as positively, beneficially involved in the broader aspects of whatever's going on in the evolution of that consciousness. Was it Joyce's line that we quote often in this program, that history is a nightmare, from which we're awakening, and that we may be awakening. But as I say, we're trapped in time, but then processes are unfolding, and we may be at a time of real excitement of an unfolding or a new level of consciousness being realized in this particular, in this particular part of the universe, which is a theme which, in a certain sense, I suppose, is one that Manson himself had picked up on as being someone. He must have had an incredible some kind of power about him to have been able to have attracted the people to him the way he did. And I'm wondering, did you pick up on that in your brief dealings with him? Did he seem like a powerful person? Did he have strong feelings that were emanating from him and so forth? What was he like? What was it about?
It's a very complicated subject, but you can treat it in terms of strands or skandhas or fibers in a rope. I would say that if you can get somebody to believe you're Jesus, you really got a leg up, and
right.
you know what I mean.
Yeah. Not to mention Messiah. Huh?
You know what I mean. And he had these people believing that he could float, and he could leap. The people would tell me that they had seen him jump a 12-foot wall, and that he was the greatest dune buggy driver since Sterling Moss.
There's a difference.
That
there is a difference.
And they would have these ceremonies apparently where they have this mock crucifixion, like the penitentes of New Mexico, where they zap him up there on a makeshift cross. And the
Did they put
individuals,
nails through his hands?
well, I don't know, probably LSD nails or something. It's hard to know. And then they would assume roles of the various early Christian apostles and saints. I mean, and there are other things. I mean, the ability to engender intense devotion and dedication to a project, and to combine criminality with Christianity, with orgiastic romances, and
complete dedication, right?
With various, and then there's a homosexuality of it that has not been talked about a lot. But in other words, there weren't really sharp distinctions in the eroticisms of it, and
he must have had,
remember I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, go ahead.
No, I just say in the 60s, they were always talking about, man, you're trying to take me on your trip, man.
Yeah,
right. I don't want to go on your trip, or don't talk to me about your trip, or wow, what a trip. Well, that was, trip.
Yeah, that's right.
The whole concept of the trip. That is, in other words, that those people that formalized the acid babble of the 60s, referring it to an airplane trip and re-entry and the whole concept of the trip, and the trip without a ticket and
trip to another consciousness.
Trip to
trip out of here.
Trip out.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not untrue to say that a lot of people were taken on the same trip.
Yeah. Well, there's an intense longing for the realization of the kind of peace and tranquility, or the kinds of altered feelings and conditions that accompany altered states of consciousness. And there are various people. There's a tremendous interest in that now, with traditional yogic disciplines being widely, having a tremendous following. They're having the Naropa Institute's going to be getting together out there in Denver again this June, and there will be people by the thousands trooping to that in search of another kind of consciousness, and some sort of, the Maharishi did the thing in the Astrodome with the people by the thousands were there looking for another consciousness, since there seems to be manifest largely a sense that there is some sort of other kind of reality, a separate reality than the normal reality that people have found for various reasons to be disquieting or boring or inappropriate or undesirous of what they want. So it's a desire for another state of consciousness that I suppose Manson promised those who fell in behind his supposed messianic leadership or something. They had a kind of disciple or a kind of leader complex. The same sort of thing that I suppose that motivated people to follow Hitler, or was it? I wonder.
Well, he was interested in Hitler, and they talked about the end of the world, and there are only a few of them to survive, and living in this huge cave city beneath the Death Valley area. I would say that in terms of where they went wrong, that there are three strands to it that I see being. And one is that not only Manson, but some of the key people in his group, like Tex Watson and Bruce Davis and Clem Grogan and the women Atkins and Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten, had certain aspects of their souls that were really intensely devoted to violence. And that's where I think that when you start paying attention to the so-called devil or devil worship, and allow such attention or devotion to give rise to a big okay to violent aspects within the psyches. That is, instead of suppressing and attempting to deal non-violently with impulses such as that, to give it to deify them and to say, the devil made me do it, or that's the actual devil made me do it, put in its most hideous extension of possibility, and so that strand of allowing devil worship or the deification of violence and bloodshed to take hold, and that's one of the aspects of one of the terrible things to me in the rise of devil worship, because I think it leads to that, and I don't. And people who say otherwise, I think, are yodeling in the canyon of the abyss. And the other strand that is sort of schizophrenia, that is on the plane of mental health. I think they had a lot of them were violent, were schizophrenic. Manson, would one sentence say he loved you, and the next sentence say he'd like to kill you and lunge for the judge with a pencil.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I remember one guy he shot. He leaned down and I think he kissed the guy. Yeah. And says, "I love you, brother," and headed out the door with a smoking pistol. I mean,
that's weird.
Give me a break. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. I suppose that kind of thing, that kind of weird quality is very often characteristic of people who stand out as what we call leaders. They tend to be weird, don't they? Or do they? I'm wondering. I don't know. Hitler was. Did Hitler have those qualities? I mean, I wonder what kind of a label of if we were to put a psychiatric label on Manson from the psychiatric community, what would it be? Paranoid schizophrenic?
I
or
guess
do we have a title for it?
I don't know.
Yeah, but he really would jump back and forth and so forth.
Satano-skits.
Satano-skits? That's
something like that. I would say.
Yeah. But yeah. But he had that. So that, in a sense, probably led to the in a sense the kinds of energy flow that would follow from those kinds of leapings about and so forth was part of his spell, as it were.
Well, once you attract violent-hearted people,
charisma. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Once you attract the type of person who would kind of take joy at chopping somebody up, and then you deify and say okay, then that's.
But isn't it true, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it true that the people who, and I'm wondering how many people there were right around him in that, but isn't it true that the people who were right around him, that this idea of the devotion that was given over to him and to what they were doing, the idea of murder or the idea of death being introduced into that which they're doing, came a little bit later, and in fact I have seen some people in the popular media who were connected with him saying that there was that they had to be in a sense convinced that this was something that they had to do, but originally the idea of murder, for instance, was not involved. Although I suppose it's coming from the same kind of area of black worship or whatever it is that you were talking about.
Well, that speaks to the third strand of what I think. That is, I think the devil thing and the violent schizophrenia, and then the third thing, I think they were treated very shabbily by the police in the early phases of its development. I think that group of people were driving around in a psychedelically painted bus and with singing and playing guitars, and they were pushed around by landlords and by specifically by certain police units who kept picking them up and arresting them for being nude or arresting them for this and that or drugs or not having, really kind of.
It's happened to a lot of people now.
And it happened to not only, and it happened to many people up and down the coast of California, especially during the late 60s. So I think that had a lot to do with the souring of that group of people.
You think it came to...
So...
But but the thing that brought them together originally, it wasn't as satanic or as sour as it became later. I mean,
I think Manson took an acid. He took his first acid trip at a Grateful Dead concert.
Yeah, that's good music.
And then experienced the Stations of the Cross. That is, he was one of the, there's the three Christs of Ypsilanti, and then there's the 10,000 Christs of Acid Land. You know what I mean? So. He was one of the 10,000 Christs of Acid Land. I mean, all over the country, there were these people who experienced this Jesus nailed to the cross scene. And in fact, there was somebody writing a book on all the various groups in the country who were led by some human being who was supposed to be Jesus.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I wonder about that sometimes, whether or not somebody would be Jesus or Messiah. And if somebody was Messiah, that would be in keeping with the ancient Jewish prophecies that there would be a leader be manifest among to lead the Jews out of the kind of, or to lead the world away from the darkness that it would find itself in. And if we are coming to a time of a major kind of infolding and a realization of a new level of understanding and a new consciousness in this particular time frame, the idea that there being all sorts of manifestations of Messiah complex is one that, in a sense, you could understand that actually being there. But I guess the acid accelerated that.
It had them all over the place. It happened to the Roman Empire. There's this really great book by Franz Kuhlmann, I think, on on pagan religions moving in on Roman civilization. And they came out of Egypt, out of Syria, out of Asia Minor, out of the Russian steppes. They came from north, from the south. All these cult leaders converged on the city of Rome. They were worshiping everything from the Magna Mater to rocks on the hill. You know what I mean? And any kind of religious ceremony was attempted to make itself known in the city of Rome. You know, especially during the Empire. So I mean, you have had a similar situation in the United States. The CIA and all military movements of our time, it created this huge empire where the United States controlled the economy of the world.
Does.
And so what can you expect? I'm surprised they're not
they should be in
carrying,
Washington now.
I'm surprised they're not carrying big psychedelic pyramids through the streets, you know.
Maybe
you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I'm surprised they're not. There's not more of religious cults and movements.
They would all descend on Washington.
You know
what a great!
They
should all
I'm
get
surprised
together.
they don't have a yearly parade down past the Capitol or something.
Yeah, what would it be? The Washington Monument, right around that great big
you know
symbol in the sky. You could have everyone who has got some vision. You know,
thousand. You know, everybody worshiping the golden eyeball, man, can be right there. Parading.
Why aren't they doing that? Why that's all? You know, I don't know whether they haven't. I wonder what's happened to that.
Because people are wise.
Happening?
People are hip to the trip. You know
what do you think that people are?
I think it's just,
maybe something like Manson comes along, and I mean, who else was there like that? I mean, who else were there? But then you have people. Who were there? I don't know. Charles.
Well,
Lane,
it had.
Lane
You see, it was like
Boston. Go ahead.
It had so many implications.
Yeah.
And that crime, and so many mysteries that still remain, you know, and as such as why was Sharon Tate killed, and I don't think that's been brought out in public. I don't think anybody has really stated why she was killed. My book. I used to think it was on a little matter of drugs, but I no longer believe that, and nor do I believe that those people were killed as a trigger device to set off a race war. I think that's Bugliosi's contention in his lengthy book called Helter Skelter.
Do you like that book?
I like the book. I reviewed it for the Kansas City Star. I think it was. I watch him in court week after week, and that's just the way he talks in court.
Yeah.
And I had an opportunity to read during the trial some of his reports, such as the reports on his interviews with Susan Atkins and his interviews with Linda Kasabian and his interviews with other members of the Manson family. And I could see that that he could put facts down in a way that would hold people's attention. And that's just what he's done. He wrote a book just like he talks. And it's full of all kinds of information that I had no access to, such as Roman Polanski's lie detector test, and such as just a lot of information. I mean, for instance, it's been 4 years. He's had an opportunity for 4 years to sift and resift and to check and to really put it together, and it is an interesting book. I don't agree, however, with the contention of the book that those people were killed for the purpose of setting up a racial Armageddon. I don't believe that, and nor does anybody who really. I don't think many people who really know the case believe in it, such as defense attorneys or other knowledgeable people in law enforcement itself. I mean, I have contacts in law enforcement that say other entirely different thing, which I don't really want to go into. But I think Sharon Tate's father is supposedly writing a book on it. That's the next Manson book that's going to come out, right? Written apparently by a former Los Angeles homicide officer and Sharon Tate's father, and that's supposed to be the new heavy book, new heavy information.
Yeah,
so the beat goes on. It's like what Graham Greene said in The Third Man. He said, had this Army intelligence officer said, one's case file is never closed. Even after 50 years and all the participants are dead, they're still lingering. I mean, they're still writing books about figuring out the conspiracy on Abraham Lincoln, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
So, and if they had the information, they'd be working on Julius Caesar. Yeah. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church burned everything relative to anything they didn't like, and also.
I wonder why. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I mean, why? Why would they have? Why were they killed? And why is there such an attention given to Charles Manson by the general? The general population is very interested.
Because
why? Is there such an interest? So, I don't know.
Because people who know that the case is still open.
Yeah.
There has been after Manson was after the. I've heard of FBI investigations that are still valid relative to the case. I've heard of there's new information that are supposedly coming out in her Sharon Tate's father's book. I've heard of I get people write me letters all the time with new information. It all points toward an incredibly startling reason that those people were murdered. That is the motive. Speaking as to why they were, and if what I've heard is true, then it's going to really startle people. And
what?
Because it's historically it's interesting from a historical point of view. I mean, it's interesting. It's the motive is historical, and the details are historical. And I don't really go into it because I may decide to write it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there hadn't been, as you say, like in those times with people who had done drugs and I don't know, whatever, like I saw one time John Bleibtreu wrote this thing we've mentioned a couple of times on acid and talking about what it does is that it affects the flow of serotonin from the pineal into the, it's an enzyme that
decreases it or increases it?
I'm not sure exactly, to tell you the truth. I think it decreases it, but I'm not exactly sure. But in any fact, it affects. The point is that it affects the flow of serotonin and mimics exactly the effects that are achieved physiologically within certain yogic disciplines. I mean, they've measured it. That's exactly what it said. Except in the case of the yogic discipline, you had to, in a sense, you had to go through certain disciplines in order to achieve that level, so that in a sense, this would be the argumentation.
We don't see yogis freak out.
Yogis wouldn't freak out because they weren't able to get there unless they had gone through the discipline that permitted them to handle where they were. Whereas with acid, people were just put there, and so you get all these crazy things. But if they hadn't, if in the case, so you had these people, messianic people walking around and all kinds of visions, but that did put them in touch with another consciousness, which might, in a very real sense, be real. The consciousness, altered consciousness of yogic, experience and so forth is real. There are other levels of reality that are being, made manifest through various disciplines and so forth. But if, and there were a number of them around, so if Manson was one, there were thousands, there were hundreds. There's still some people, there's some hangovers. If he hadn't created the violence, if there hadn't been the murder attributed to him, I'm wondering if
group of murders.
The murders hadn't been associated. I mean, of course, this may be a non sequitur or something, but if they hadn't been murdered, would he have just been just another person who faded from view? And so, in a sense, the murders would have been a kind of grim kind of, an attention getting divided.
Well, it would have gone the way of a sect. Either a sect fades or it institutionalizes itself and begins to worry about dental hygiene programs and health insurance and getting a nice former monastery to set up its headquarters in, and sets up schools. I mean, I don't know, and proselytizes. I don't know, or I don't know the route of what happened. That would have happened. I couldn't speculate to,
That's right.
What would have happened? I assume he would have
gone into oblivion.
God knows,
he would have become.
He might still be out there, just. I don't know. It's useless to speculate. But I just to get back to the violent-hearted people, I think that counterculture and that group of people were acted on. There was a huge attempt by Nixon-type mentality to discredit the counterculture, discredit the anti-war movement, discredit anybody who took pot or acid, discredit anybody who hitchhiked around and wore long hair, discredit rock and roll, discredit the Woodstock nation phenomenon, discredit any form, anything that was tinged with long-haired socialism or any kind of socialism, and to discredit. And I think that there were incredible violent forces and devilish forces that reacted against the long hairs and the counterculture and attempted to destroy it or to manipulate it, to get it to create violence, to violence. And that's always the ground, always what the rightist people try to do is create violence and thereby to discredit.
Yeah, right.
And so there was I think that those violent outgrowths do not in any way discredit the basic goodnesses of what happened in the 60s.
Oh, what was represented by the counterculture, right? You mean?
Well, the good thing. It's the old baby in the bathwater routine. I mean, just because somebody freaks out and flips out and starts,
I'm wondering if we could draw an analogy to that. I mean, all of the horrors that you get within a historical dialectic, of where there's these people warring and fighting and carrying on. What do you do with and Auschwitz, or the other horrors of a historical condition of people attempting to, feeling as though the only way they can implement their life's purpose is at the expense of some other group of people. Well, it's a story of war that's gone throughout the whole of the human experience.
Right.
It just comes and goes. But I was just saying, on the dialectical, the experience of the counterculture, you have a Charlie Manson. I wonder who the comparable figure in terms of, if there is a comparable figure in terms of the establishment, as
Kissinger.
It were. Would be Kissinger? Would it be
Kissinger
Kissinger, really?
Kissinger
Is it Charles Manson in the establishment?
Kissinger is Charles Manson, because he, one 15-minute sortie or napalm or fragmentation raid against the civilization of Cambodia in 1970. In one 15-minute thing, he did more of violence and evil than Manson ever did.
Yeah. It's hard to know, really, if you can put
the... Manson's karma doesn't redound on all of us, really, because we didn't do it. But anything that Kissinger did and Nixon did and the bombers and napalmers and pineapple bombers and fragmentation bombers did, bounds back onto our souls, because they are representatives of us as a nation, as citizens, as American citizens. And their karma burns itself on our soul every second.
I'm wondering if it's possible, if we were to go back to that line of James Joyce. That's one I happen to like. I'm trying to figure how the hell you can structure information and bring an altered kind of condition in the historical nightmare we've been in. And to look back through that, and you've got things like Hiroshima, you got things like Auschwitz, you got things like napalm in Vietnam, you got things even now being carried on. Whether or not we'll ever be able to get beyond the condition wherein so much of the energy is being put, because on a larger scale, that whole idea of extending American sway around the world is part of a dialectic that sees itself at war with socialism and sees itself within a dialectical system that is, in a sense, a horror, and from my way of thinking, predicated upon a condition of assumption that there is not enough to go around for all. But the means by which we could move to a point where the responsibility for that historical nightmare could somehow be either dissipated through a general kind of amnesty that we might somehow be able to extend to the whole of the human family. We've all been caught up within a historical nightmare of ignorance, which is barbarous as we look back through history, and have been imprisoned in time, as it were. Whether or not we'll ever get beyond the limitations of a historical condition that we've been a part of, and if in that process we would still not be able to find the means by which evil, or the representations of evil within that overall dialectic, thinking comprehensively, could somehow either be dissipated amongst us all, or is it possible still that we're attempting to find scapegoats to put all the blame for those conditions within the dialectic which we have called, in our ignorant condition, evil. We used to burn witches and things that are called evil. And in the one case we might have a Charlie Manson, in the other case you might have a Kissinger. Whether or not there is really no enemy other than perhaps ignorance of overstanding the total process, I'm not sure if you can understand.
I think we brought up one idea there that's, to me, really, that is the idea of a lifting of burdens. The Greeks, the ancient Greeks had a thing on the economic plane called a seizaktheia, which periodically everybody would be forgiven their monetary debts. That is, you could say, you could just forget paying off the bank, forget paying for your car, forget paying for your house. That all debts were forgiven. And it happened, I assume, during periods of economic crisis. And of course, you can see the Rockefellers and everybody, they would grumble and rumble, but you just say something. And if it could happen on a spiritual and moral level, that is, if somehow a mystical forgiveness for imperialism and for napalm and for all national crimes and personal crimes and spiritual crimes, and have a big karmic, that would be great.
That would have something. Maybe that would have something to do with what we loosely term something like human liberation, is a term that's usually, it's if you're doing something like we do this thing, and we like to think it's somehow being done in the service of something that we loosely are groping. What is it, like a big group grope toward something called human liberation, which is resonatingly pretty close. I happen to think that we may be really close to an interrelated kind of. This is strange thinking. We may be very, very close in temporal or time way of thinking. We may be very, very close to a kind of like interrelated such clique. I mean, within the next, to my way of thinking, it's sometime within the next few months. That's my sensing of things and everything. And so I'm always trying to structure and to think in terms of that ultimate possibility, and therein be able to deal with people in such a context wherein I don't see any enemies. And this is really difficult these times because there's so much paranoia and scapegoating going on, as we have a tremendous sense of excitement, because the new that condition that you said is very highly desired by many people, and it's a life-supported desired thing. But we haven't yet quite got the situation together, and usually it comes right down to where we're just almost ready to do it, except there's somebody there that's going to be like, usually somebody like, well, there's somebody, everybody can be forget, except it's maybe it's Kissinger. Now we'll just get him, get it scapegoat. Maybe it was even in the case of Nixon, or it's maybe Charlie Manson. Everybody could be put. Do you understand what I mean?
Well, and I think the problem you raised,
get everyone. That's why I was talking that thing
can
about
be solved by nonviolence. I'm a personal believer in the Gandhian ahimsa, and I think there's a mystical power almost in nonviolent direct action, and I think that the way to confront evil, and more specifically evil people, is to confront them with nonviolently. And I think somebody like Kissinger could be confronted, but you need a few Socrates types. That is, people with access to Kissinger on a high level.
You have to raise their confidence.
And to not let him sit down to a nice, elegant banquet without giving him a little grief or giving him a dialectical
Don't you think
exchange.
I think he's got a lot of grief. I look at him sometimes, and he looks to me like, he looks to me like, we've done a couple programs.
Well, he knows that history is getting ready to puke on him.
Well, so that's the way.
He's got problems. I'd be
Can you imagine? Can you imagine being Henry? They're all aiming to get him. It is tremendous pressure under. He's under a lot of pressure.
Because it's not the 19th century where historical records can be destroyed. This is the era. This is the data era.
Yeah, that's
Anything anybody does.
It's going to catch up to
This is data.
Yeah, we're finally going to be able to. We're going to be able to finally have it clean. We're going to have the whole record, right?
The record's going to be. Anybody wants to look at the garbage. The garbage has not been thrown away.
Yeah,
you
right.
know what I mean? And the garbage is right there in the filing cabinets and on microfilm, microdot, microfiche, and other.
We did a program with Barry Goldwater a couple of weeks ago. About the right to privacy and everything. I like that. In a sense. I'm glad the data is catching up. I'm very interested in that. Myself.
It's going to enforce people to be just open and honest.
That's
just
cool.
Let it what Ehrlichman called the hangout route.
Yeah.
I mean, just have to. The hangout route is going to be the route.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be no closets.
I think that's fine. Yeah.
No caves.
Are you ready to hang out? I'm ready. I'm ready to.
I'm ready for it. I mean, there's no other way to be.
Except, well, I don't know. It's still a little bit thing. But I mean, it's like we say with Kissinger. Right?
Well, I just wrote William Colby. I wrote him a letter. And I said I would like copies of my computer printout and all information about me on microfilm, microdot, tape, photograph, Xerox, or any form of information system. And that's naked lunch, man. You know what I mean? That's a subject insulted 5th grade English teacher. You know what I mean? Subject was seen picking nose at Boy Scout Jamboree in 1953. Subject attempt made pass at you know what I mean, or subject was seen enclosed as photograph of subject naked in commune.
Yeah, Saunders, the Saunders uncensored, right? And that's not even mentioning past lives.
My God,
have you ever had any experience with past lives?
Or Akashic? Oh God, when
have
the CIA starts compiling your Akashic or whatever they call it,
record,
then you're really in trouble.
They won't know what you're talking
Subject in 1453 stole goat.
That would be good, but they wouldn't understand that. But in my experience, if you start, I've had a little experience actually with people in those, like we did with Mr. Goldwater, right? Barry Goldwater. Now I operate no enemies, okay? And we did it with William Simon. He's another person. He's responsible for the economy, William Simon, and he's under a lot of pressure. You can tell when somebody's under pressure, you know. I expect you get the same thing from Mr. Kissinger. You're under pressure because there's all of this stuff coming, and it's again coming back to that question of the means by which a new means of the operation of this interrelated system. In a sense, they've got responsibility. They're in a position of responsibility for the institution, power, and responsibility and power for the institutional structures that we've inherited from the historical condition. Right? We've inherited these nation states. We've inherited, the President of the United States, and we've had all these institutional structures, which are, if we're coming to a new kind of condition relevant to that general amnesty that you talked about, as being perhaps relevant in terms of the broader operations of, the evolution of consciousness, that those traditional systems that we've been operating under are inadequate to the new condition. So they feel under tremendous threat, particularly as they begin to start thinking in terms of a historical condition in which change, major change that has been introduced within a dialectic, you know how that change has been generally introduced, don't you? A new system would come along and wipe out the old system.
Well, it's the Akkadian hillsmen coming down and wiping out the Sumerian,
barbarians at Rome.
Sumerian valley dwellers.
So that people are responsible for that old way of doing things. They're just, within thinking the dialectic, they think, well, it's going to, the only way you're going to have a new system, new to them means you're going to wipe out the old. It may be, possibly, and this is coming back again to Mr. Fuller, Buckminster Fuller, who is like a poet, and probably, we did a program, I mentioned it with Allen Ginsberg one time, with Mr. Humphrey, Hubert Humphrey, and he recognized Hubert Humphrey's political.
Well, Humphrey and Ginsberg were on the same.
No, wouldn't that have been? That would have been.
That might have been.
It would have been probably good. Humphrey.
Well, because Ginsberg's gentle enough and nonviolent enough to actually get into a dialogue with Humphrey and karmically to discuss.
Oh yeah.
Some of Mr. Humphrey's transgressions.
Well, Mr. Humphrey's a pretty nice. I think. Well, of course, the trouble with me is I like everybody.
Oh, Humphrey's
right?
Okay, but I mean he's got the blubber mind problem. I mean,
he's
he's got a weak. His karma is bad on the war, of course, and on kowtowing to Johnson. And
he's a vice president.
And to be
he's an older guy.
You can't be a populist while you're depopulating.
Well, anybody who's had a position of responsibility within that historical nightmare.
He didn't want to lose his security clearance, I guess.
Well, they're going to have a hard time explaining some of the things he did. But we have to be, from our position, it would seem to me, you have to be careful of not to lay too heavy an emphasis upon reading that past from the expectations of the present or future. If you go back and you say, how could you possibly have done that? Those people who have been operating in those past systems have been operating in a condition of where they didn't, you understand what I mean?
Well, we'd be in much better position if Humphrey won the election against Nixon.
He didn't because of the Yippies, right? The Yippies did that. They got some karma to answer for, wasn't it? Yeah, I'll bet you if they hadn't gone to Chicago, that he may have won.
Well, there were only about 100 Yippies.
Look at that, 100.
But there are other people that
there
went
were
to
7
Chicago.
Yippies on trial finally in the end, right?
But they weren't all Yippies. There were only two Yippies and 5 other human beings that were not having anything to do with the Yippies. They were basically.
But it was the Yippies who put that together.
Well, the Yippies were like the Citizen Threlwell in the day of Wordsworth. That is the type of person for whom the police and the media devote much of their time and space, and they accept like Bernard Marx in 1984. They accept the hate of the police and the people.
Yeah, Yippies. Who are the Yippies? Reuben and Hoffman, I guess you had that.
Well,
Reuben and Hoffman
I agree.
Were the Ehrlichman and the Alderman.
Well, I think it was they may have had something to do with it, but I think that the weakness of the divisions within the Democratic Party ruined the chances of Democrats.
Well, it's academic. I mean, he didn't win anyway. But anyway, Mr. Humphrey, we had this program with Mr. Humphrey, right? It's interesting, though, isn't it, that there were 7 Watergate defendants and 7 at the trial in Chicago. I don't know if you say. Mr. Daley, I noticed, still won the mayoral election in Chicago. Anyway, he's still. Anyway, this program was.
As long as they got those graveyards, he'll always get the votes.
Yeah. But in any event, yeah, he's waving to the crowd. Yeah. But in any event, but the thing is, we did the thing with Mr. Humphrey, and he said on the program that the poetic process, the political process, which has had principal responsibility for the operation of the planet. In terms of those, the President of the United States, they're political people, they're not poets. But that the political process, and this is why I was interested in what he said. I don't know if he was jiving, but he didn't seem to me like he was. He was telling me that, this is what he really felt. He didn't think he had any chance at the presidency or anything like that, so he was just talking, and he said he felt that the political process will, and we talked actually about things like human liberation, which is hard to introduce in those political circles, such abstract concepts. But he talked human liberation. He said the political process would be included within the poetic process, and that in a sense the poetic, it's in the poetic process which has the ultimate responsibility for understanding what it is comprehensively that's going on. And then he was having reference to that general proposition by our having introduced the concepts of Mr. Fuller, who was a comprehensive ecologist, as it were, and counts himself like an integrated poet in terms of getting a comprehensive understanding of what it is that was going on. So in bringing that back to the Kissinger, or the idea of that poetic consciousness would, in a sense, introduce itself to those responsible for those political institutional structures we've inherited, in a way of introducing to them an alternate means of operating the spaceship Earth, but do it in a way that's not political, do it in a way which is going to be able to, recognizing a transference from a condition of scarcity, not only economically, but in terms of our understanding of the broader patterns of what's going on, scarcity, which has been the historical nightmare that Joyce had referenced to a dawning realization of opening upon the capability of assigning design or institutional structuring on the realization of there being enough to go around. This would represent the effective, ecologically sound utilization of technological productive systems. I think probably, like we were talking before about the Bay of Fundy, as a ecologically sound means by which energy could be generated. Mr. Fuller suggested we need new economic propositions by people responsible for the traditional systems to bring some of those ecological sound patterns to the operation of the planet. But we bring that to those political leadership, but bring it with that realization that so we could have major change, a major change for the first time in the evolution of affairs on spaceship Earth, or in this part of the universe, a major alteration beyond the dialectic, where in a sense no one loses. We could have, everyone could win, and the only enemy that would be recognized within that would be ignorance of the overall condition of which we've been a part. But as you said, introduce that kind of change proposition to those responsible for that traditional message, not politically, you're going to wipe them out, but that you're going to bring a new condition that's going to be inclusive of them, as it would be inclusive of all. But it's really hard very often to do that, because people fall back into trying to see, who's the enemy and who's the one to getting in the way of our really getting on with doing things, maximally. But I'm just
so the enemy, in my opinion, is oligarchy.
Okay.
And the entrenched power freak money gougers from. It's like Charles Olson. Charles Olson, the poet, used to say that the foundation of the CIA military-industrial surrealist complex was cod fish captured off the coast of New England for the last 200 years, raising capital for the New England bankers and financiers who later became the Council for Foreign Relations and the Bundys and blah, blah, blah.
We did a program with William Bundy a couple weeks ago.
So, I mean...
we tried to talk this stuff to him, and there, he said it was at Christmas time. He said this is he talked about being under pressure. We were talking about new geopolitics and all of this immoral relation, and the premises of geopolitics, which don't fit very nicely in the idea that, there's enough for everybody. It was this immoral, what is it, Niebuhr wrote, The Moral Nation, Immoral World, and this, power and everything. But he said it's the most difficult, I liked him again, but he said it's the most difficult Christmas that those people have ever experienced. And
Was that the Christmas of '72?
That was Christmas this last. He says that the systems are under, that the charts are going off the board. There's a discontinuity. They don't understand. The old game isn't working. There's a new condition that is not able to fit into the traditional pattern. So a lot of those people in positions of responsibility for those, traditional patterns of operation are under tremendous threat. I mean, because they don't yet. We've been spending, perhaps people who are concerned, perhaps we've been spending so much time just trying to knock it rather than trying to get in touch with them within a context nonviolent, as you say, Gandhian in that sense, of providing an alternate way of doing things, and why, in terms that could include them. But that's like getting beyond that idea that there's an enemy. And so much of the energy generated within a dialectic is coming, because you've got the enemy to identify. And that's where so much of the energy comes from. I wonder if that isn't the case with Manson even. Do you understand? I mean, if it's not just you have to have an enemy to be attacking. And perhaps, to my way of thinking, the only real enemy is ignorance. But anyway,
well, the idea you should.
So you don't personalize the enemy.
Never view anybody as unsavable, I guess, is the basis of nonviolent activity. It's just difficult, especially when the people whom you're opposing are carrying on a war you can't believe in.
Yeah, right.
Or are exploiting a group of people you don't believe should be exploited. That is, the poor or even.
Which is just going on now. I mean, the poor.
Well, I mean, the poor have to stand and beg and sneer and
they're
dribble
eating cat food
to get enough money to buy bad food at the A&P.
Yeah, they're cutting back on food. They want to cut back.
And
on
rather
food
than set up state, like in this Woodstock area, this is marvelous food co-op where they call, I believe it's called Beggar's Banquet, where they supply, they get food at good quality organic food at a great saving over what they get at the Grand Union. Yet, there's a route for the federal government. They should set up huge Beggar's Banquet food co-ops for the people, the senior citizens of Miami Beach.
Yeah. However, on the whole, there are these economies of scale that accrue to large organizations, and so really, like in terms of the economic, you have I think, despite the cooperative efforts, the cooperative development, everything important, but the productive process itself is increasingly like wealth. Right? The productive process is increasingly technological in its productive capability. The ownership right, or the ownership holding of viable holdings of capital, ownership right, and the instrumentalities of technology are, let's say, in this country, and it's characteristic, I presume, of most of the world, is something like 1 or 2% of the population, at the outside 5, has any effective holding of ownership right in the technology. And that's the major component, increasingly, of production of wealth, as it were. Everyone else is expected to relate to the productive process through a labor relationship to it. You have to get a job out there in the factory somewhere. And here they are getting Lordsville, and they're getting plants, and they're getting automated processes of moving information and so forth, which is making it unnecessary for a lot of the kinds of work, task, things that people have been doing to justify a living. I mean, there's a discontinuity with the way we've been organizing things economically. But again, then, if there is something wrong with the traditional system, then the thing is is to present, it seems to me anyway, present to those people in that position responsible an alternate way of doing things. That's something I'm interested in alternate kind of. I got the this economic system, Lewis Kelso, that is interesting and seems to be interesting to those people, because they got these huge multinational corporations now. Maybe there's some hope in that. In many ways, they begin to start thinking of the whole planet.
And still, the economic system is prevented from making huge sums of money off of pain and off of people's natural needs, that is, for food. I mean, it's going to come a day where you're going to be buying a big balloon full of fresh air, which they'll hang outside of your windows, big floating balloon, and you'll be paying out the nose for mafia-controlled fresh air. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's going to be a grim gig. You know what I mean?
You think it is?
As long as you have to pay out the nose for getting just what you need to be a biologically surviving human being, then
see, that's a hard thing for those people to understand. The people who are responsible for the economy.
They want to make their money. They
want to make money.
They want to go over to Harvard Club and brag about their stock dividends of that quarter. You know, I mean,
well, they want to make money and they want affluent. Would you be in generally in favor of the proposition of a condition where everyone who wanted to be, this sounds maybe absurd, okay, so anyone who wanted to be could be, affluent? I mean, the idea of general affluence is one that is appealing to you.
Well, other than with the
there's nothing ennobling. There's nothing particularly ennobling about poverty, is there? I mean, I don't think.
There's always a Howard Hughes coming along, who's going to want to have. I don't know. Maybe we're all baboons. I don't know. You know what I mean? Maybe there has to be a general scalpel job done by some super-emanated extraterrestrials to shape up the Earth.
Or maybe it's just ourselves. We have to shape ourselves up, or get ourselves together to where we can understand it, in a way what it is that's going on.
It's the will to rip off. There's this incredible will to rip off, that I see, and as a curse in the human species, and as long